Yeah.
Oh, I should get.
Yeah. Okay, so
It's water.
sure, it's yours. Yeah, yeah. So we're gonna have you in person and we have two online presenters. Okay. So
That would have been a smart idea.
We should
so
call that.
they are
I'm supposed to be
Osvaldo
teaching in the
and
Upper West Side in
yes.
25 minutes.
Do they know you're not gonna be there? or they're
No,
just
I've
gonna
let
leave?
them know that I'll be late.
No,
Yes.
it's the middle of the semester, like what?
Juliana, can you see the presentation?
No. Oh, in an hour and 25 minutes. Yeah, that makes much more sense. Oh, yeah, thanks.
It's like, oh, do you believe right after you say?
Juliana, can you see? Okay. So
No, I can't see anything. I can see you guys, the panel.
I think we're gonna try to.
Now I can see myself.
Hello, Paulo.
What do you teach?
A discussion section. This right now, the one that I have today is a discussion section on European history in the 19th century, democratization and dictatorship. And I'm also teaching intro to quantitative methods. So,
Oh, man.
yeah.
Both sound very light and easy to do.
Both of them are very heavy and very different ways. Yeah.
Oh, gosh. At least the 19th century, you can kind of like get lost in the past. At least that's how I feel when I'm studying the 19th century. And then I remember it's like not that long ago. Ya, ¿estamos bien? Okay. Bienvenidos todos. Hola, ¿cómo están? Hello. Mi nombre es Katy Cabrera Figueroa. My name is Katy Cabrera Figueroa, and I'm welcoming you to panel number 4, Inequality and Intersectional Approach. I am here to greet our panelists. Here joining us in person is Oswaldo Mena. Oswaldo Mena is a Mexican PhD student in his 3rd year of the political science program at the Graduate Center. His research relates to policies and the politics of redistribution in Latin America. He is interested in how do certain governments in the region have managed to decrease inequality and poverty through social policy, labor policy, and tax policy. Back in his home country, he was a public officer for nearly 10 years. He has also been a research assistant at the Stone Center for Socioeconomic Inequality, based at the GC, as well as a teaching assistant at the Columbia and Barnard. He enjoys bike riding in the streets of New York City. Joining us over Zoom is Juliana Valente, a PhD student in the Cultural Anthropology program at the CUNY Graduate Center. Prior to beginning her PhD, Juliana worked at an NGO in Brazil with youth who committed crimes. Her current project is focused on issues related to citizenship, human rights, crime, and youth in Brazil. She received her master's in social anthropology from the State University of Campinas, UNICAMP, and her bachelor's in sociology and education from Vassar College. Also joining us through Zoom is Paulo Suarez Rojas, a PhD candidate with the GC Anthropology program. He got his BA in anthropology from UCLA. He studies Marxist critiques of political economy, Lacanian psychoanalysis, I hope I said that right, theories of political subjectivity, and historical relations of Latino AX working class migrants, Racial Capitalism, and Revolutionary Political Organizations in the United States. Currently, he is conducting ethnographic research on tenant politics and the housing crisis in Los Angeles. Finally, in person, we have Susie Oppenheimer, who specializes in 19th and 20th century art and visual culture of the hemispheric Americas. Her research focuses on waterscapes, particularly the role of oceanic imagery in shaping conceptions of race, modernity, and extraction across visual art, new technologies, and spectacle. She is an adjunct lecturer of art history at various colleges within the City University of New York. Previously, she was curatorial associate of modern and contemporary art at the Art Institute of Chicago and curatorial project assistant at the Whitney Museum of American Art. Thank you and welcome. I guess we'll
thank
start with Oswaldo.
Yes, thank you.
What is it?
This is on, right? Great. So I'm going to talk about taxes. Well, first of all, let me very wholeheartedly thank CLACLS for the summer fellowship that allowed me to discuss certain ideas regarding Mexico's taxation policy with some of the policymakers that were at the helm of these decisions. I'm happy to report that this project has transformed into a paper that had an revise and resubmit acceptance from a journal. So hopefully it'll be published near the winter, if the reviewers agree with me, I guess. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to start with where should I point this?
Yeah, sorry, I just want to make sure that Paulo is there because.
Oh, sure, I can wait. Let me tell you what this paper is about. What I am trying to accomplish here is to compare two processes of production of tax bills, both of them done in the post-democratic era in Mexico. One of them was met with, I'm going to quote, failure. The first one was attempted by the first democratically elected president in Mexico, Vicente Fox, in 2001 and 2003. And it was, most of the literature treats this case as a failure because of the most important item that this president tried to accomplish, which was an value-added tax of 15% over groceries and medicines. I'm sorry for the detail. I'm going to go in length into what does that mean in a moment. It was thwarted by the opposition, whereas in 2013, with a very similar institutional background and setting, the Mexican president Enrique Peña Nieto in 2013 managed to accomplish his passing of the tax bill. Even more surprising or interesting or puzzling than that, however, is that the content of the 2013 bill was progressive, meaning that it taxed, it placed the burden of taxation more on capital and corporate profits than on labor. And I'm going to go in some detail about what that was puzzling and surprising. But first, let me start with an idea of why is this important. So Mexico is the second largest economy in Latin America. This is the sort of lay of the land in 2013 when the second tax bill was discussed and passed. So in 2013, not that the situation has changed very much, but in 2013, Mexico collected 9.5% of its GDP in tax revenue. So it was the lowest on the OECD, the lowest in Latin America compared to similar economies like Brazil, Chile, Argentina. You can see that the dashed line is the average of tax revenue as a share of GDP that was 21%. The continuous line is the one from the OECD with 16.5%. Mexico was at a minuscule 9.5% of the GDP. After 4 years after this tax reform was implemented in 2013, it has increased to 16.4%, still below the Latin American average, but however, it was a relatively substantial increase. This is important as well because, and there's an extensive literature dealing that one of the reasons that allowed Mexico to fail to pass taxation had to do with the the resource that oil represented, that all exports in oil represented. However, particularly in the 2000s and ever more after 2005, there has been a steady decline in the collection of resources from oil, both in terms of the reserves and in terms of oil production. So that made the need for revenue even ever more pressing, and this sort of made it extremely hard to keep procrastinating such a change. And of course, the reason why limited revenue matters is because it translates into limited public spending. The left panel shows total public spending, again, as a share of GDP. Mexico, it's the laggard in the OECD, but also it's it's below not only the OECD, but even Latin America. Not even it's the laggard in the OECD, it's the laggard compared with similar economies, and it's a laggard in Latin America as a whole. And that is true not only of total public spending, but also importantly, public social spending. So perhaps engaging in a truism, even though it might be a very dry area, taxation is deeply political. It has to do with the redistribution of resources that are in the interest of all of us. What this graph shows is the Gini index variation after taxes and spending in Mexico. The Gini index, it's a coefficient that allows to represent synthetically the distribution of overall income. 0 represented total dispersion of resources, 1 representing total concentration of resources at the top of the distribution. And what this graph is showing is what does different countries, similar economies, accomplish in terms of redistribution and inequality after taxes and spending. And as you can see, the effect that Mexico had just before the second reform was implemented was minuscule. It only managed to reduce 0.02 percentage points compared to Korea, Chile, and Turkey, which managed similar economies, which did a very much better job. So going back to the puzzle, what am I interested in studying in this paper? The first part of the puzzle, let me first tell you, perhaps you know them, but let me first tell you about the main political actors, which had to do with the 3 largest parties in Mexico at the time of this reform was passed. One of them was PRI, which was the authoritarian party that ruled over Mexico for over 70 years. The second important actor, is the left to center PRD, which is a party that emerged as a split within PRI. And the third actor is PAN, PAN, which is the right to center party that represents business, middle classes, etc. So the first part of the puzzle is that once upon a time, PRI was considered to be a left to center party. It actually still is a member of the Socialist International. But since it was a party that emerged from the Mexican Revolution, it is the party that oversaw land redistribution, the creation of social security institutions. It oversaw the build, of social security institutions and many outcomes that were considered to be within the agenda of a progressive agenda. But in the 1980s, it was also the party that oversaw neoliberal reform and the slashing and privatization of public enterprises. So it was precisely that turn in its direction, in this ideological direction, that created the split that PRD that made PRD come into existence. So even at the height of its power, when it was within an authoritarian presidentialism setting, PRI attempted progressive tax reforms in 1953, 1961, and 1972. And even at the height of its power, it didn't manage to overcome the opposition of business elites. The first part of the puzzle is, so why does this party that attempted, that at the height of its power didn't manage to overcome business elites, that underwent an ideological transformation so that it shifted to a right to center, then managed to pass a progressive tax bill in 2013. And the case that I used to compare is the attempt that the first Democratic president, right to center Vicente Fox attempted. I try to use this case as a comparison of a setting that was very similar in its institutional layout, but however didn't manage this success. So what I mean there's a theoretical background that it's pretty much the hook into the journal. So I will spare you the details about what are these theoretical frameworks for. And I'll first go into what do I mean by a very similar institutional setting. So a part of the literature has dealt with the possibility that the fact that since democratic transition, no president has managed to achieve a majority in the government that has translated into deadlock, that I posit that cannot stand as an explanation because both cases face this institutional setting. Both of them were cases of divided government, so both of them would be cases of potential deadlock. However, as I have been mentioning, what one was met with success and the other didn't. So what these graphs are saying is basically that no party since democratic transition has held a majority. So on the lower graph, what it's saying is that coalition building, legislative coalition building has been the norm in Mexican democracy ever since democratic transition. So parties, all three major parties have been accustomed to coalition making, to negotiation. But in one case, one particular reform proved difficult to pass, whereas the other succeeded. I make the point that despite this pattern of cooperation, the one policy area that breaks the camel's back, I think that's an expression, is taxation. Now, what I mean with the nature of the bills in terms of whether they were progressive or regressive is that the Fox attempts had several items, but the most important piece was attempting to increase a tax on sales called value-added tax of a 15% at a 50% rate over groceries and medicines, which had been until there and still are in Mexico exempted from taxation. The reason why this is considered a regressive tax is because even though the richest spend in absolute terms more in consumption, the poorest spend the largest share of their income in medicines and groceries. So even if those who were the absolute burden will be those consuming more, the poorest will be devoting a largest share of their income. That's why it's considered a regressive tax. The reason why I considered the other bill to be progressive is because most of the items it placed on taxation on corporate and capital tax gains. And the rationale that I found to explain why one was a success and the other wasn't is that on the one case, the successful one, this tax was a part of a much broader legislative agenda. Peña Nieto in 2013 attempted a massive set of bills, different bills, since he had a divided government. This was one piece that was part of a bargain to get other pieces of his agenda, of his legislative agenda in place. So the ideological flexibility of PRI in this particular regard allowed it to build a coalition with the left to center PRD to pass this bill. And that's the most important explanation of why this case met with success where the other couldn't. So 1 minute. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Next, we're having Juliana, who's gonna join us.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes. Hello, Juliana.
I can't hear what you guys are saying. I'm sorry.
You cannot hear us?
I can hear you now. Should I begin?
Yes.
Okay, sorry, everybody. So I first wanted to thank the CLACLS team for the opportunity to share my work with my colleagues and also for the summer fellowship. I also want to explain that I remained in Brazil for the fall to continue doing my research, which is why I can't be with you guys today, but also why the ideas I'm presenting here are still very raw and not as beautifully organized as my previous colleague. It's a bit hard to systematize my thoughts when I'm in the middle of fieldwork, but I've tried to highlight a few points that I wanted to think through. And if we do have a moment for feedback, I'd love to hear ideas. So my fieldwork is based in the city of Campinas in the state of São Paulo, Brazil. And though I'm circulating through a series of institutions, I'm primarily going to focus on the work that I'm doing at one NGO that services youth judicially mandated to complete their program. And I should also explain that I worked at this institution for about 7 years, and my master's was focused on the work of this NGO. So this is a place I know well. And though the research I'm doing now is not actually directly taking place in the NGO, I'm still working with the same youth. So I'm going to talk about some of the changes that I've kind of was confronted with this summer when I arrived in Brazil. But I wanted to stress that this is something that I can kind of follow because I've been kind of engaged with these youth since 2012. My research in the field of anthropology has focused on the political role of documents in the lives of adolescents, particularly those who are criminalized. I'm curious as to how equal rights are conferred bureaucratically to future adult citizens, and interested in both the bureaucratic mechanisms for conferring these rights, but also how citizenship is produced in the future tense, and might not be very tangible for youth in the present. According to legislation enacted in the end of the 64 to 85 military dictatorship here in Brazil, children and adolescents are a unique category of subjects undergoing a specific developmental stage. So they're imagined to be in this transitional stage before adulthood. And the same legislation also stipulates that any subject between the age of 12 and 17 will be judged and punished for committing crimes separately from adults. And these correctional measures are structurally different from the adult criminal justice system and have as a major kind of objective to re-socialize and like diminish vulnerabilities of youth. So there's this kind of simultaneous process of enforcing a conviction that's aiming to, hold youth accountable for crimes, and while also trying to do a series of activities that will minimize vulnerabilities, provide access to rights, etc. Thinking that doing these activities would then prevent crime in the future, right? So, for example, youth might be demanded that they return to school or access healthcare services. And all of these are usually determined judicially. The other kind of important piece of information is that in Brazil, citizens must hold at least 5 different documents, and they confer different types of statuses. So there's a worker ID, there's a voter ID, there's one for driving, there's one for being a taxpayer, such as the Social Security, which is similar to the Social Security, right? And it is understood that these documents are essential for guaranteeing rights, right? Since IDs are and have historically been central for formal equality. So the counselors at this NGO usually claim that documents are important for accessing rights and basic services, right? So you can't go to school if you don't have a state ID to prove that you are so-and-so's child and that she can enroll you in school. So I was kind of interested in this, in following the object of the idea as this kind of mediator into thinking of issues of youth, crime, rights, and citizenship. And to just give some further context and to my current kind of questions, during the 90s and the 2000s, Brazil experienced a period of economic growth and a large effort towards the distribution of rights and income. And in many ways, the distributions of rights was tied to the dissemination of IDs. So, for example, President Lula his globally recognized welfare program, Bolsa Familia, requires that people hold IDs. And in order to guarantee that the population is visible to the state and can access these welfare programs, right? He began a program that aimed to the distribution of birth certificates so that they could be obtained for free, or they get given out in maternity wards and hospitals, et cetera. And this program was under his human rights agenda, right? So you can see welfare, human rights, and IDs are all kind of tied together in this early 2000 program by Lula. A lot of scholars have pointed to the fact that the growth of distribution and rights in Brazil did not actually diminish levels of violence in the country, nor did it curb the growth of illegal trade. And you can see this in the growth of a big drug cartel, the Primeiro Comando do Capital, PCC, as well as in the levels of like trafficking of stolen cars through the Americas. And these scholars also point that the election of Bolsonaro, an extreme right-wing supporter of Trump in 2018, is kind of a culmination of these two growing tensions, right? The growth in distribution of rights and this like not diminishing in crime or violence in the country that kind of was gaining force into 2010s. I left Brazil in 2019, the year Bolsonaro entered office, and I was in the US when the pandemic hit. And the effects in Brazil were devastating. 700,000 people died during the pandemic, which is second in terms of total numbers only to the United States, and fifth in terms of relative numbers when you consider population per 100,000 in terms of like global numbers, right? So I knew that the combination of Bolsonaro and the COVID-19 pandemic would be devastating in Brazil, but I wasn't quite prepared for all the challenges that I was going to face once I came back. So I wanted to highlight two that I was kind of really focusing on this summer. When I first began thinking about this project, youth were really excited to take out their documents. So though this was like one more demand that the judge was enforcing, right? Asking them to go back to school, et cetera, et cetera. Obtaining ID was actually something they wanted to do, and not because they actually wanted to go back to school, but this was because it was, you know, important for getting things like store credit, employment, for being able to circulate through the city, being able to drive, etc. And their mothers, and I'm specifically pointing out the role of mothers here, also felt a certain urgency that their kids take out their documents because IDs were seen as a way of proving that you were someone if you were stopped by police, which could in turn prevent summary execution or disappearances, right? So if you prove that you were so-and-so's daughter or so-and-so, you know, that you were part of a family that you had, that you were really the person that you said you were, that was a way of preventing executions by the police. So I was surprised when I returned, and the reality was actually the opposite, right? Youth and their parents did not want to take out IDs. The youth didn't see any use in these papers, and they started talking about how the police was actually using the IDs as one more form of violence and intimidation. So the police officer will record the birthday of youth and threaten them by saying, I know the day that you will complete 18 years old. I know the day that you can be arrested as an adult, and I'm going to come for you on your birthday, right? And the ID was one way of easily giving out that information to the police. Also, the police have started a practice of actually threatening and even torturing mothers when they don't have access to youth. And the IDs, again, right, is one way in which you can access that information easily. And so what was initially, right, a project that was thinking about how documents could prevent violence is actually looking at how documents are used as a mechanism for violence. And number two is, and I'll try to do this quickly, while there was so many efforts to ease bureaucratic processes, as I've explained, because these were essential for the distribution of human rights, I've seen that there's actually documents have become harder and harder to obtain. And one of the major changes is that these documents are now digital. You have to request them online. You must show them through your phone. And the youth I'm working with rarely keep a phone for a long period of time. Sometimes one phone is shared by an entire household. So if you can only have one ID per phone, that makes it really hard. And again, the police will sometimes break phones, right, or take out chips and stuff. So it's hard to have these documents being digitized because they're ephemeral, right? So I guess I'll end just kind of that this is the moment that I'm thinking right now, right? I'm still trying to kind of follow these issues, think through these changes, tracing how this is an effect of both the pandemic and Bolsonaro's kind of policy of, you know, he used to say that bandido bom is a bandido morto, right? Like a good criminal is a dead criminal. And we're seeing kind of the effects of this type of agenda, right, in effect in the country today. Thank you.
Sorry for rushing. We have the room until 4, so we have to take the time. So next is Paulo. Hola, Paulo. Hello.
Hola. Cool. Sorry.
¿Quieres que you want me to present for you, or you want to share your screen?
I can share my screen. Yeah. Thank you. I got 10 minutes, right?
Yes.
All right. I'll put my time. Okay. Can you see this? See? All right. Okay. So thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much for the money and the investment in my research. So the presentation is going to be mainly a discussion of the data that I've gathered so far, some of the history that I've learned, and then arranged in a particular way in which you already kind of has a particular analysis in mind, but it's mainly just things that I've learned during my research. I have this quote by Mariátegui here because what has been the main motivation for me to conduct this research has been the idea of using Latin American Marxist strategies and theories in the context and conjuncture of Los Angeles. And that's where my research is, and that's where I do my organizing. And so I think this quote captures very well the sentiment of trying to do that in particular conjunctures and places for each of us, right? Okay, so my research is set in LA. It's mainly an ethnography, fieldwork ethnography, anthropology. And it focuses, the context for it is the housing and homelessness crisis in LA. And it's the usual story, right? Gentrification, development, luxury business, property management companies, landlords. In LA specifically, what we have is a liberal progressive kind of hyper bureaucratization where like a lot of different tenant protections get passed. Again, and my research focuses on housing crisis and tenant politics. So a lot of recent tenant protections have been passed after COVID, but these have not necessarily addressed the main problems that tenants face. They have just made the process much more complicated and tedious and extensive and still ultimately harmful for them. So the main focus of my research so far has been working with the LA Tenants Union. The Tenants Union was formed in 2015 and is basically composed of different locals situated across different neighborhoods in Los Angeles. And each local, the basic unit of a local is a tenant association, which is usually a group of tenants that have united in a building, and they have recurrent meetings to discuss the problems that they have and find solutions to them. And so there's different people that come to these meetings, like organizers, facilitators, and also like the tenants themselves. So I've been a part of a particular TA and a particular local located in Cape Town, and I'm going to talk more about this particular group. The story of the Cape Town local starts with Latu, which was composed again of these different neighborhood locals. And the neighborhood of Koreatown didn't have a local. This is a neighborhood in Los Angeles. It didn't have a local, but the other locals noticed that a lot of buildings that they were organizing had one similar landlord, one single landlord that they could all organize and tackle. And so they started organizing as a council. And then the council found out that there were buildings in Koreatown that were also part of these landlords. And so they started organizing them. And the main buildings that were organized there were the buildings in one in Gramercy Street and another one in Western Avenue. And so these buildings started organizing rent strikes particularly. And from their struggle is that the K-Town local emerged, the one for this particular neighborhood. So the K-Town Koreatown is a neighborhood located west of downtown LA. For anyone that's been to like, downtown LA, it's east of the beach and like Santa Monica and what everyone is usually familiar with. And it's a gentrifying neighborhood, but it's also primarily inhabited by poor working class people, mainly Latin American immigrants. And so some of the things that the K-Town locals started doing, particularly with their Western building, was doing marches and protests to property management supervisors, who usually would come to their buildings, these supervisors and managers, and try to kick them out by offering them money. And when they wouldn't want to take the money because people wanted to stay there and live there, right? They would threaten them with deportation. They would threaten them, sexually harass them. They would not repair their units. Basically, the story that we usually are familiar with when we think about displacement is evictions. But before evictions happen, or even sometimes evictions don't happen at all, there's this whole other way of approaching displacement, right? That's usually informal, not necessarily illegal. And when it is categorized as illegal, there is this bureaucratized process that you have to engage in to try to argue that it's illegal, and no case so far has won. So there's no regulation really for these particular slow type of displacement. So these marches started happening, going to these supervisors' houses and basically bringing all the tenants and trying to protest in front of these houses so that these property supervisors would back off. And from these movements is that the Koreatown locals started consolidating. And one particular tenant association formed at the beginning of this year, and that was the 739 Normandy TA, and that's where I came in. It got formed, and then a few months after it got formed, I began helping them along with other organizers. And some of the things that they do is, again, the TA meetings, which often, like I said, involve mostly organizers and tenants. But in this particular case, like the picture is showing, you can't really see, but there's a large amount of people, mainly because there's city deputies that were invited there, and they're here in the corner. They're basically, they wanted to talk to the organizers, but the organizers said, if you want to talk, come to one of the TA meetings and talk to everyone. And so they came, there was a conversation about what they could do. There a lot of the limits of the city, that city regulations have were talked about, etc. So these are just some of the things that we do. There's food distributions that we also do and organize with the tenants themselves. I've also been a part of this. And one of the interesting things about the 739 Normandy TA is that we found out about this building and its need for organizing because people were being offered money to leave, and they didn't know how to fight against this. So they went to the Western building that I mentioned earlier, to one of the meetings there. And then from there, we learned about the situation and we came and we organized. Now, the other TA that I've been working with is the 751 Normandy TA. And there was a similar situation happening here. This building is literally 2 buildings next to the 739 Normandy. And they were going through a lot of different things. Like, these are people's ceilings that were crumbling down from a flooding that happened in July. And no management, no supervisor was paying attention to this. So they also went to Western and they also went to 739, and that's where we met them. And then we went to their building and we started organizing there. And so there's other things. The flooding basically destroyed the laundry, destroyed people's walls, kitchen cabinets, and this was polluted sewage water. Another thing is that the landlord wasn't paying for trash services, and so we managed to get these pictures from city trash, the city trash company or whatever, and you can see that the amount of trash that was spilling out already. So this is a rundown of what happened with 751, because I started there, I organized there and facilitated most of the things there. And so we have this like month-to-month history of like different things that we did. The highlighted things are the things that we did, and then the non-highlighted things are things like reactions from the landlords and supervisors and other things that happened. And you can see mostly, I'm not going to go through everything because I have literally 40 seconds, but you can see that there's this back and forth, right? There's different things that have to happen. It is a tedious, extensive process, and we have managed to win some stuff. But again, it's a process. But the main thing that I wanted to highlight, and I hope you were able to notice throughout the presentations, is that there's a lot of Latin American migrants that are involved in this. And Spanish-speaking long-term working class immigrants. And so the question for LATU, and I'll run through this, has been, now that we're moving away just from focusing on TAs, but on looking at larger marches to fight the city for a particular law, we've been thinking about immigrants and the question of immigrants and Latin American immigrants, and how do we think about them? I'll finish right now. So these are some of the marches. We've done assemblies. And so through these processes and these interventions, most of the questions, there's a video, but I won't show it. But that's basically the last assembly that we had, fully in Spanish, mostly immigrants. So for me, this is just a compilation of the things that I've done. But basically the question is, how do we think about the Latin American immigrant in Los Angeles, the working class Latin American immigrant? What are the processes that have led to political subjectivation? The different ways in which they politicize, and what if we begin to think LA as a territory of Latin America? So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Paulo. Amazing presentation. It gives us hope. Okay, so last but not least, Susie, please share your amazing
Thank you.
research.
And thank you everybody who stayed for this part. This is actually wonderful practice because it's not intimidating in this, to have 5 people
You're with
me.
friends.
We're with friends now. And to have seen so many wonderful things also makes me feel
Yeah,
fabulous.
thank you for being here the whole presentation. And
And the whole panel. Okay. But though, thank you to my colleagues also on Zoom, and to my colleague who also had to leave, I know. So I'm really grateful for the research funding, which allowed me to visit Mexico City to view a work that I've been studying, which is a mural by Diego Rivera titled El Agua, Origen de la Vida, which I will be talking about today. A mural that the artist completed with a team from 1943 to 1951. Yes. So I study this mural for a variety of reasons. The first being that it's an often overlooked mural in Rivera's body of work, mainly because it's a mural that failed. Though it was completed in 1951, it was destroyed by 1956. So I'm interested in that particular failure, thinking about Oswaldo's failure discussion as well. The second reason I study it is why it had been destroyed. The paint, which had been specifically designed by Rivera to withstand water, had been destroyed by the water of the Lerma River. It was restored in 2010, which is why I have images of it that you can see on the left. This is an image I took during my trip. So you get a sense of we're looking at a sump tank. So the mural is within that sump tank, but on the right, you can see one of Diego Rivera's posed photographs within the mural from the 1950s. But I am interested in its destruction by that body of water that came from the Lerma River. So this will become clear as I introduce the mural, I hope. So Diego Rivera had slippery ambitions for El Agua Origen de la Vida, or water origin of life. As he reflected in his autobiography, it was, quote, the most fascinating commission of my career, a mural that could endure submerged underwater. In 1943, Rivera was commissioned by the architect Ricardo Rivas to decorate the inside of the Cárcamo del Lerma, or Cárcamo del Dolores, a large water tank in Mexico City's Chapultepec Park, tasked with sanitizing water at the end of the new Lerma hydraulic system, which was then new in the 40s. To stand up to, actually, let's put this one back. To stand up to water and sun, Rivera chose to paint with a polystyrene emulsion called BKS 92. A petroleum-derived polymer, molecularly similar to styrofoam, the material was considered infallible. And he did these series of tests to come to that conclusion with much fanfare. Inside of Rivas's Cárcamo del Lerma, Rivera and his team painted monumentalized human progress through technological innovation. Two cupped hands top the tunnel, linking the Lerma system to Mexico City, with beads of light blue water flowing outward and framing the passage. So you can see how it looked originally in the early 1950s on the right when it still had water in it. The implied gush of water hits the center of the tank, which represents a theory of the beginning of all life on Earth, cellular reproduction. Spiraling around the center and lacing the bottom of the tunnel are increasingly complex forms of life, from paramecia to hydras to trilobites to green algae. The north and south walls depict figures meant to stand in as an African man and an Asian woman. Relying on debunked 1924 racial theories of Soviet scientist Alexander I. Oparin, Rivera invokes Africa and Asia as the beginnings of the human race, leading to, in the artist's words, quote, after several generations from the seventh, perfectly Aryan types, stupendous platinum blondes with 90-degree facial angle and blue eyes. Purposefully, the artist attempted to overlay the features of Olmec sculptures onto the Asian woman in order to argue that indigenous cultures of the Americas originated in the Asian continent, which also interestingly ties back to earlier research, but sort of in a distorted way here. These are helmed by portraits of 24 engineers that designed the hydraulic system, sitting in the format of Jesus Christ's Last Supper, looking down at technological blueprints. And there's a lot of blueprints. I won't get into everything. I just want to get to the point. I know we have 10 minutes. Sorry, let's go back to this. Rivera's final vision of progress resided in the social importance of water. Surrounding the, quote, Asian figure is a landscape representing the semi-rural, a dusty village in which a dark-skinned family receives water from a worker. They are hedged by an indigenous temple, colonial church, and modern building reminiscent of the refectory tower of the Ciudad Universitaria at the Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico, or UNAM. These mirror their supposed inverse, figures tending to plants, including corn. My current scholarship on the subject argues that water, origin of life, must be read eco-critically as a waterscape in order to address its relationship to race, class, and place. Housed within Chapultepec Park, the mural is located within a curated version of nature that, in the 1950s Mexican miracle era, was steered for upper-class leisure and middle-class education. Rivera's portrait glorifies and art washes the contemporaneous effort to construct massive hydraulic systems that redirect water from the westward Lerma River into Mexico City. These efforts resulted in the deaths of indigenous workers and ecologically devastated communities far outside the city. Beyond Rivera's depicted mural, I'm interested in the actual hydraulic system that once funneled into this sanitation tank, rerouting water from the Lerma River. The Lerma hydraulic system was developed as a state effort to enrich the water supply of Mexico City in the mid-20th century. The network involved a complex system of pumps and dams that moved water from west to east, necessitating 62 kilometers of aqueducts and 26 tunnels dynamited into mountains. However, water pouring in from the west carried within it chemicals and industrial byproducts manifested by the hydraulic system's construction. The toxins in the water, which had rendered the Lerma River nearly non-functional for ecosystems outside of Mexico City, such that the Lerma has been termed, quote, an enormous stinking sewer, had destroyed the mural. Rivera's technological innovation of plasticine paint was annihilated by the chorus of humans and non-humans and more than humans whose water entered the sump tank. Commissioned by President Miguel Alemán and paid for with tax dollars, Rivera's mural marked a visual manifestation of the government's conception of water. Water was positioned as an infinite resource that supported a march toward progress. However, this rerouted hydraulic system, which served the city center of Mexico City, displaced and disrupted the human, non-human, and more than human lives along the Lerma's river banks. Just to summarize in brief a lot of material about what is happening along the Lerma and has happened along the Lerma, it became this enormous sinking sewer because of its relationship to industrialism. So factories sprung up and deposited waste into the waterway, which resulted in, and the rerouting itself resulted in chronic cyclical problems, areas that were once managed by long-standing, centuries-long droughts and floods where people knew exactly when and where these floods would happen are no longer possible. And people are now dealing with the destruction of their homes. Because water got rerouted, there are certain areas that now have high nitrates in their soil because the wastewater is now fertilizing land that once was used for agricultural systems. So now there are wonderful adaptations that happen with different crops being planted, but just thinking about the long-term impact. And what's interesting to me is that those byproducts still came back and came for this glorification of a nationalist Alemán Mexican miracle era, and ostensibly ate and sandpapered the paint off, basically as a response to a rerouted water system. But I do want to highlight some of the things that I was able to find just through having this funding, and thank you to CLACLS for that. I have 1 minute to do that. So I saw things in the mural that are not possible in reproductions, including this young light-skinned man showering in the corner with this cleansed water from the water system. I'm really interested in the impact of the mural itself within the surrounding environment. And you can see that things have actually overgrown around the system. It's a much less visited, it's the west end of Chapultepec. So you can see that wildflowers have sprung up basically surrounding the entire environment, graffiti on the water towers, these kinds of human and non-human interventions that really build out this idea of what a landscape and waterscape are, as this chorus of voices is my, oh, I had a video, but don't worry about it. Then, you know, visits to the Archivo Diego Rivera, which resulted in a great deal of press clippings that help build out the political environment. And long-term, I hope to better study, you know, what is happening along the Lerma, not just sitting in Mexico City, looking at the actual mural itself, and think about it as I'm a hemispheric Americanist, thinking about waters as something that disrupt the notion of the nation state and bring together chorus of voices and people that would not be possible without thinking of different types of authorship. So thank you.
Okay, so we have literally 5 minutes for Q&A, comments, questions. Sorry.
Oh, I have a comment.
Yeah.
Please.
So, one is, the other guy was a Marxist.
Yes.
So there's like the Marxist theory of the Asian mode of development, which has to do with the control of water, right? So in Marxist, part of it is about the control of water. So maybe there's something there about the other guy's enthusiasm for the project. Another his notion that coalition was mostly after the revolution. Like, yeah, he's for modernity, modernization. He also has like a social project. So yes, I mean I know there's a coalition. That's also historicized in a different way. Like now, rain, weather patterns change. What are the combinations there? And growing the second is I would look into the functional layers and this one which is the economic context. That begins with the creation of a river to between the lakes, the three lakes, like a foundation part of the and the notion, central notion of nationalism, and it's there in that place, including like the Spanish town, which has this huge, incredibly wasteful project, which killed a lot of people as it reports indentured individuals forced to dig out the ditch. And I would also look into the project in agriculture. I don't know if you know
I do, yes.
Convent, where the convent was covered, right? So it was this work of it was art, but it was drawn by but it was covered in classroom. It was only then reconstructed in the 90s, the 2000s, thanks to research. And I think it kind of whole concept of reconstruction. Kind of interesting to see these parallels of reconstruction. And lastly, obviously, Aguilar.
Yes, yeah. It's too much to mention.
Second layer of art, public art. There.
Yes, the sound.
Maybe you could talk about that.
Yeah. First of all, there was so much good material there. So thank you for being so generous with this feedback. And there's so much to think about, also so much cut from how I can talk about this. It's like one of those things that really provokes you to think differently about objects and art and communities. But it is just a comment to respond to some of the things you brought up. It is definitely interesting to think about Rivera's relationship to Marxism. It's at this point in his life where he has been since kicked out of the Communist Party, and he is doing this kind of performance to be re-invited back. It's the end of his life. And he's using these theories almost in a political way just for himself as well, to be like, look, I've read the Soviet literature. I know these theories. Look at me like performing this link of an internationalism that is happening there too. I love what you were saying about, thinking about urban sprawl. Yes. And there is also a section that I think about Mexica water systems that predate this time period and how they're both being referenced but distorted in this waterscape itself. And the sound, just to respond to that too, it really is a fascinating thing. It's a microphone that plays the water system that is no longer routed through the tank, which has been restored in 2010. And it is beautiful. Like, it's like transcendent. Like, it's a fascinating experience. I guess that's all I have to say about that. So I'm glad you brought it up, but thank you. Thank you.
I think we have to leave because there's people waiting for the room, but thank you very much for your presentation. Amazing.
Thank you so much.
No, thank you. And thank you, Paulo and Juliana, for joining us virtually. So yes, we're gonna send you soon the certificates. This counts like an academic conference. So also we're gonna have, we're gonna ask you if you wanna send your articles for publishing in a publication we want to do for the CLACLS Fellows. So yeah.
Thank you so much, truly. Thank you.
Yes, yes, sorry, Diomelka is gonna.
No, just wanted to thank everyone who came in person, those who joined us online as well through our Facebook Live. We, on behalf of the CLACLS team, we're so grateful to have you all here. We are happy to see how the summer fellowship has pushed and has led to the, production of knowledge among GC students, and we are beyond happy to see how you guys have taken the fellowship and made the best out of it. And for those of you watching online, we encourage you to apply for the fellowship. The call for applications will be out at the beginning of the next year. So thank you all so much for participating and for sharing your knowledge with us. It's been a pleasure to have you all here with us. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.